Okay, so thank you for joining us here on Clexico today.
Hmm.
Um, if you
Absolutely.
don't, yeah, if you don't mind, could you do a quick introduction of yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Saarthak Shankavaram. I'm a composer in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am a senior in high school. Uh, I'm primarily an orchestral composer. I've been composing for around 7 years. My roots come from Hindustani classical music, and but of course I compose for orchestra, so some of that influence may be present in my music. Um, yeah, I learned from Lukasz Janata, but I've had mentorship from people like Don Corigliano, Michael Gandolfi, uh, people like this. Yeah.
All right, incredible. Um, how did you get started composing?
Well, I think to answer that, I also have to tell you about my background as a musician. So I'm a violinist. So, and as a violinist and as a Hindustani classical musician, so Hindustani classical music is very much based on improvisation and making things up on the spot. And for me, when I would look at a piece of music, I I wouldn't just think about the piece of music as a violinist. I would also think about like, oh, what was going through the mind of the people when they put it on paper and when they were thinking about this and how did that come to be. So then I would write this stuff down on random pieces of paper that I would find out around the house. And then finally my mom one day was like, okay, let's get you a book where you can put all of this stuff in. And that was the beginning of it. It was mostly, oh, I want to do what these people do, and to an extent, I do some of it I did some of it in Hindustani classical music. Now I just need to figure out how to do it formally.
That's a really interesting origin story. What's your thought process when you start composing? Like, what do you think about? Do you take any inspiration?
Yeah, I think almost more important than actually composing music for a composer is listening to great music. Um, there's like maybe a misconception. I don't know how many people really believe this, but like contemporary composers only listen to contemporary music, and it has to have at least three electronics and a euphonium, a didgeridoo, and a rain stick. We all listen to the greats: Mozart, Beethoven, Wagner, Shostakovich, the great composers of that came before us. So that's really the biggest part of the creative process, just listening to music and seeing what we find that can work in for ourselves. A big part of what I do is also um just fiddling around. I have the fortune of being an instrumentalist, a violinist, and I'm not a great pianist by any means, but I can. I mean, it's right back there. I do fiddle around with it, and sometimes things do come up. Um, I know my teacher, Lukash, and his mentor, John Corigliano, who they both have this system where they literally graph out their pieces before they even start writing a single note. Um, which is it's pretty inspiring and it really helps because that what that does is it lets you focus in on the process rather than just putting something there, putting something there, putting something there, and whoa, okay, the piece is over, right? It so it's like a mixture of bringing in sources from great composers and just really focusing on the process and the journey rather than just winging it.
Although you're a violinist, you're also an orchestral composer. So, when you're writing orchestral music, how do you like think about melody, especially like in like other instruments, maybe like the flute or the clarinet? Other, do you have like guidelines for writing that, or does it just come naturally to you?
Um, that's a good question. There are a couple ways. One thing is, as a violinist, I also have a lot of experience in orchestra. So, I play in CYS with you, and I play in the San Jose Youth Symphony. I've played in the San Jose Youth Symphony for 4 years, CYS for 2 years. I've also played in the All-State Symphonies. And part of what I do, part of my philosophy when it comes to playing music is I want to know the pieces as if I'm the one that wrote them. So really understanding what the composers did, why they did that, and how they achieved it, and what does it do? What does it convey to the audience? Um, the other thing that can be quite useful is composers of the past have been pretty insistent on putting their thoughts into writing. Um, it, it's a good coincidence. I have Berlioz's treatise on instrumentation right here. It goes through uh, like what he thought, and it was edited by Richard Strauss, two of the greatest orchestrators of all time. Right? He and they both and Berlioz was a big really good at orchestrating winds and brass, and of course also strings. And Richard Strauss was all about 23-way string division for violins and every single cello playing a different line, right? So they really knew each instrument to a T. And while I do believe that having experience listening to music, score studying, I love collecting scores mostly because I get to look at the actual music rather than just hearing and trying to guess what's going on. Because, just for example, in Ravel's Bolero, he goes through these different orchestrational techniques where at some point he imitates an organ using if I'm remembering correctly, it's a piccolo, a horn, and a piano, I want to say. But and it is kind of deceiving. You may not be able to guess the instrumentation, but then you look at the score and you're like, oh, this is what's going on, and this is what's happening, and this is why it makes sense. So yeah, score study, looking at what other composers did, and also uh, as a violinist, it's a weird place to be because we're not completely monophonic, and string instrumentalists in general, we're not completely monophonic, and we're not really polyphonic either. So it's kind of you get a bit of both worlds. I know David Conti would say, no, you're not a monophonic instrument at all. You need to play the piano too. But it's it's uh it's interesting because we get to understand harmony as well as straight melody, which is really useful when it comes to composition, I would say.
CYS is playing Slipping, and I understand that SJYS is also playing another one of your compositions.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Slipping?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Slipping is a project that, so the origins of it were I, read Mr. Eiler's bio, and I was like, oh, he taught composition. Let me send something to him and see what he thinks. And he looked at it, and it was my scherzo sorprendente. He looked at it and he basically, like, after a week decided, oh, let's have you write something for the orchestra. And so it was a quick turnaround too. I needed to get the parts in by May, so I had to start work right away. Uh, so it Slipping is interesting because I think it's pretty much almost like a biography of myself as a composer. So it's based on one of Hinduism's teachings that like egoism and self-centeredness is kind of the enemy to like a greater consciousness or moving past materialism. So that's like that's a big picture. So the beginning is jagged, it's just all messy, and it's contrapuntal, and there's like little small glimmers, but it just goes back to the same hammering at just ego and all of this, and suddenly it culminates, it blows up in this self-centered person that, oh, I can't be doing this. This is harboring me from doing anything beyond what I already am. And then the end just kind of floats away. That's the idea. They let go um of all this the self-centeredness, and they finally come to peace with themselves. That's the idea behind slipping.
And then is that related to the subtext Tershna Moksha? Is that the ego and self-centeredness?
Yeah, so Trishna means kind of pride and ego, basically. And moksha is, I think the more popular term is actually the Buddhist term, which is nirvana. So they're similar concepts, slightly different because of course different religion, but they're similar concepts. Yeah,
So it's kind of like the journey from Tershna to Moksha, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And then about your SJYS piece, could you go into detail on that as well?
Yeah. So the piece being performed by the San Jose Youth Symphony's Philharmonic Orchestra is titled Leela. So Leela, this one was interesting because I actually got commissioned by SJYS's music director in 2023. But there's been but we had to figure out a concert date because the next year would be a tour year, and he was swamped, so he didn't want to program it on the tour year, but he was like, okay, let's do 2025 to 26. So I finished it in 2024. So it's been a long time coming. But so Leela means cosmic play or divine play, basically about how the universe plays with people. It basically depicts a hero's journey. Um, so it starts out with the humble beginning, and then a call to adventure, and then a great demise. So it you could look at I just to make it easier to explain, I'll just take like an example of like this mythological hero, right? They start from really, meager origins, like no one expects them to be anything, but suddenly they rise to prominence and they're catching all about, and um, something bewitches them. They're suddenly not able to do anything, but society still needs them. So they come back and they fight their final battle and they die in glory, basically.
So you have a very imaginative and creative mind.
Well, I hope so. A lot of my ideas come from my background and my what I'm just seeing in day-to-day life. So I have a lot I have a lot to see and a lot to create, I guess.
What do you think about um, being a composer in the 21st century, especially like with the rise of AI music and computer generation?
So I think the 21st century is an interesting time to be a composer, especially because of AI. Um, it has taken away from the magic of music making because a lot of people, and of course, I'm not an expert on how AI actually works, but I, along with many other people, can see what it's doing to musicians. People kind of see this pretty mediocre music that AI generates, and but they see it as nearly as good as even like some of the greats and from the past and from the present, and it kind of devalues music in my opinion, because it's taking the humanity out of music. That's what makes music great. Music isn't great because of the authentic cadences and the beautiful voice leading and a lack of parallel fifths and octaves. Music is great is because it's created by humans and because it's a human form of expression. Same thing with visual art and same thing with poetry and writing. These are forms of human expression. They aren't forms of technological expression. So they
Mhm.
have an innate emotion tied to them, which AI music takes away, but people seem to equate that because, oh, it's just good music, but it's not music, it's sound, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I see it.
And as a final message, to anyone who's interested in contemporary music or like um just to the general youth musicians, what would you say?
Um, sorry, could you repeat that?
What's one message you have for young musicians and composers?
Hmm. I think my one message is that music doesn't have to get worse. Um, Something that I often see is that people say Beethoven was the greatest because he started something new.
Mhm.
Um, and people just kept copying him. And so they were kind of getting worse and worse and worse. But I think it's not a great way of thinking because music isn't getting worse. That's why music is absolutely not getting worse. Yes, Beethoven, I agree. Beethoven is one of the greatest of all time, but so was Brahms, who came right after, who's, treated as a successor to Beethoven. In some ways, Brahms was greater than Beethoven, and in some ways, Beethoven was much greater than Brahms. After Brahms, you have uh, you can go into the late Romantic with Debussy. People often don't make this argument, where Debussy was kind of the first impressionist, though he rejected the term. He was the first impressionist, and Ravel took after him. But people often don't say that Ravel is greater or is worse than Debussy because he came after that, because that's just not how it works, right?
Mhm.
So it's not that music gets worse over time. It's just that traditions are passed down, they evolve, and they turn into something completely new. Yeah.
It's a very nice message.
Okay.
Well, thank you for taking the time to be with us here.
Oh,
And
absolutely.